Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Womanhood and International Relations podcast. I'm your host, Natalia Bonilla. And for today's episode, we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Rushan Abbas. She is the Executive Director of Campaign for the Uyghurs. Rushan, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to this podcast.
Thank you so much for giving me this chance to talk to you and address this atrocity of this century and the genocide of my people.
Rushan, I want to start this conversation with you learning more about that moment of impact that led you to launch the organization Campaign for the Uyghurs.
Yes, thank you. That is a very valid way of going into these atrocities. Ever since I was a young child, I was born in the Cultural Revolution, so I have witnessed my people being discriminated and suffered. If you look at our history, let me give a little bit of quick, Uyghurs or the East Turkestan 101, just to give you a quick rundown here. So the Uyghurs are originated in Central Asia, or the north of Tibet and west of Mongolia. And it's being occupied now by a Chinese Communist regime since 1949. Ever since the occupation of my homeland, our people has been oppressed under the different labels. During the 50s, right after the occupation, Uyghurs were suppressed and labeled as nationalists. And then during the 60s, when there was a cultural revolution in entire China, Uyghurs were labeled as counter-revolutionists, which my grandfather and my father and my mother, they were victims of those suppressions. And I was born and raised in the middle of that, actually, in 1967. And then after the Soviet collapsing down, and then Central Asian countries having their independence, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all of a sudden Uyghurs became separatists because we are closely related to people in Central Asia, and the Chinese government started to oppress our people during the 90s as separatists. Then after 9/11 tragedy in the United States, because we are Muslim, in overnight, China became the victim of war on terror and labeled Uyghurs as terrorists. And so, as I mentioned, from the time that I was a young child, I started to feel the suppression and discrimination, and my people, the Uyghur people, is being treated as a secondary citizens in their own homeland. But then during the mid 80s, when I was going to school, shortly after China opened up and establishing democratic and diplomatic relationship with United States and the West, we had a little bit of relaxation or freedom, so-called. So I decided to continue to advocate for Uyghur people. And then I was one of the co-organizers of the protest against the regime's discrimination. And we had a protest in 1985 and then again in 1988. Then I came to the United States 1989. And then when I was living in the United States, I continued to advocate for Uyghur people. But starting from 2017, the situation in back home for Uyghur people deteriorated very rapidly with over 1 million Uyghurs back then taken to the concentration camps. And now it's actually far more than that. By May of 2019, it was more than 3 million. Watching all that, just to raise awareness, we established Campaign for Uyghurs in 2017. And then we started to advocate for the human rights and the democratic freedoms of the Uyghur people and the other suppressed people in East Turkestan. So the mission of Campaign for Uyghurs is mobilize individuals and the international community and to build bridges to take action on behalf of and raise awareness, public awareness, and the advocate for the Uyghur people. And our special concentration is actually empowering the Uyghur women and the Uyghur youth and train them and help them to become effective advocates for Uyghur people.
Rushan, in terms of clarity of the geographic landscape, you spoke of East Turkestan. There's been talks about the Uyghur people in reference to the Xinjiang province. I don't know if it's the same, if it's different. You mentioned that China occupied territories. I just want to have that clarified.
Yes. East Turkestan, not East Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is different. East Turkestan, which is a geographical and the historical and the symbolic name that we like to use. That's the name for our homeland. And now it's being called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Yes, what you are referring, Xinjiang, is the name that given to us by the Chinese regime after the occupation. Xinjiang means in Mandarin Chinese, new territory, which means Xin means new, Jiang means territory or border. So that name itself is a very clear colonial name that's shows the occupation. So we don't like to use that name, just like Tibet is known as Tibet, right? But in China, the Chinese regime calls it Xizang, which Tibetan people don't like to use Xizang and they use Tibet. So the Uyghur people take the word Xinjiang as derogatory or insulting. So I don't like to use the word Xinjiang. But you are right, that's the same area. And it's north of Tibet and west of Mongolia. It's northwest part of China. And it's size-wise, it's about 1/6 of entire China. And it's about 4 times of California size-wise.
That helps a lot to situate and understand better how to address what's happening in this specific territory. We have been reading several reports for quite some time on the atrocities, the crimes against humanity, the different torture, sexual violence that's happening in this specific territory. Could you share with us what's the current situation? Why is it important that we pay attention to what's happening with the Uyghur people?
All of what you say is true, everything you mentioned, and more actually. In our homeland, East Turkestan, the concentration camps, modern-day slavery with forced labor, Orwellian surveillance, systematic sexual violence and the sexual torture have become the norm today. About 1 million Uyghur children are taken from their families, sent to government-run orphanages to be raised with their allegiance and loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. And also the Chinese Communist Party continues their attempts to silence the Western media and the many countries with debt trap diplomacy and the trade threats and also the power of the Belt and Road Initiative. And also if you look at, the famous people, famous sportsmen and the celebrities like the NBA, NFL, Hollywood, and even some of the politicians and the scholars, all the famous celebrities who are usually so vocal against any sort of social injustice are silent today when this genocide is happening against the Uyghur people, because the perpetrator of those crimes against humanity and the genocide is China. And when the perpetrator has money and the power, everybody, the majority of those people who are supposed to defend democracy and supposed to be very vocal, for example, like feminists and the people who are supposed to defend the children's rights, where are they now? They're all quiet. So it's not just about the Uyghurs, but about the free world and the democracy, because what you are seeing here, what I just described, is kowtowing to a dictatorial regime like today's China, the Chinese government. One basically betrays the very values of humanity. So what's happening to Uyghur people today is a test for the conscience of the world, but the international community is failing it. And just give you a little bit of clarity here with my personal connection to this cause. I am speaking to you today. I am doing my advocacy work around the world. Today, I'm sitting here talking to you from the lobby in a hotel in Prague, in Czech Republic, as a part of my advocacy, raise awareness trip to Europe. I have been traveling for 5-6 European countries here. This is my last stop before I go back to the United States this weekend. But in September 2018, my own sister, Rushan Abbas, a retired medical doctor, a gentle, non-political, law-binding grandmother, was taken by the Chinese Communist Party in retaliation for my activism in the United States. So only 6 days after my public denouncement of Beijing's genocidal policies, my own sister is taken. So basically, I am doing my advocacy work today and going around the world and speaking to you at the cost of my own sister's freedom. So while my sister suffers as an innocent civilian hostage by the Chinese government is getting rewarded by hosting the Winter Olympics, with the International Olympic Committee refusing to end their complicity in the Chinese party's genocide. Basically, they have legitimized the genocide, just like they did back in 1936 in Berlin. So to your other question as to why we should care, I will tell you this. We should pay attention to this genocide, this atrocity, because after the genocide of the Jewish people, there was a vow never again, but it's happening all over again on our watch, and this must stop. Nobody is spared when hate takes a hold, and we can and must end genocide once and for all. With the Chinese Communist Party, it's not just about genocide of the Uyghur people, but it's a threat to the free world and the democracy the Chinese communist regime is. It's a threat to the free world and the democracy. For the future of all people and for the free world, we must stand against this encroaching evil.
In terms of these calls of cultural genocide and these trials that are taking place in several parts of the world, the UK did a trial just recently on what's happening with the Uyghur. What are your views in terms of international community response? You mentioned the genocide, but somehow some lives are considered to be more valuable than others for the international actors to prompt a more rapid response. And for some reason, this is not happening with the Uyghur people. What's your views on this?
Unfortunately, money, as I mentioned earlier, when I give you an example of the celebrities and the rich and famous and all this people who are so vocal, criticizing anybody does anything, any sort of social injustice, while there is a genocide is happening, they are quiet. Well, there are so many complicity in there with the Western corporates making money out of this genocide, and they make this genocide a profitable venture for the Chinese regime. When Uyghur women's bodies have become the battleground of China's genocide, while the Uyghur women are facing systematic mass rape, forced sterilizations, forced abortions, and they forcibly inserting IUD devices inside of their body. I can't believe that there are so many people still looking away and acting like nothing happened and continue to do business with this genocidal, barbaric regime and continue to do business as usual and making China's economy more powerful, enabling China's economy to murder more people. So it's extremely frustrating for me. As I said, when these people, leaders, or countries voluntarily giving up their freedom of speech and freedom of expression, when it comes down to it, tomorrow, that's their sovereignty that they are giving up, because the Chinese government is controlling their way of choosing between good and the evil, and they take a stand for humanity.
The first time that I heard about the Uyghur people's human rights violations was in terms of the women's rights violations. This calls from forced sterilization to Han Chinese men living in the homes of Muslim Uyghur women, while their men were sent away either as arrest measures or preventive arrest measures or prison camps or forced labor, etc. The more I started learning with the reports that came out from China was that it was worse. Like you said, forced sterilization was also a campaign, sexual violence, gang rape, different types of violations to women's bodies. Is there a specific reason from your research and your point of view that women's bodies are being targeted, that are being used as a weapon of war? Sexual violence is used as a weapon of war?
Absolutely, there are important reasons the Chinese regime goes after women, because it is a strategic way to fracture a people's will. Women are pawns, basically, in the vision of the Chinese government. They are completely controlled from their movement to their words, to their health, to their bodily autonomy. Basically, their bodies are not even belong to the women themselves. I called government-sponsored mass rape of the Uyghur women by the name of sham marriages when talking about the forced marriages that the Uyghur women are forced to marry Han Chinese men, while the Chinese government is sponsoring those Chinese men with money, housing, and the jobs to go and marry Uyghur women. If she cannot refuse to not to accept such a forced marriage because she's not ready to get married, or she doesn't want to marry this particular man, or for any reasons, she will be labeled, not just as her, but her entire family will be labeled as Islamic extremist, didn't want to marry non-Muslim Han Chinese. So basically, Uyghur women are being raped by the Chinese government-sponsored sham marriages. And also, Chinese government itself reported on the state media 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres, mainly men, deployed to Uyghur homes to live inside of the Uyghur homes, supervise and monitor their daily lives, most of the Uyghur men are taken to the concentration camps or prisons or forced labor facilities. And those Uyghur women are subject to rape and the sexual abuse in their own home. Can you imagine this? Nowhere in the history something like this happened. None of the atrocities has witnessed something like this. You know, no matter what happens to a group of people, I'm not trying to belittle anybody's atrocity, but I'm just saying, if anything happens to people in the jail, in the concentration camps, or in anywhere, but everybody had a place that they can come home and their private sphere, and that they can just cry or just, hide in a corner. But for Uyghurs, that's even taken. So basically, with all that, what they are doing to Uyghur women, as once they said in one of the leaked documents, the Chinese government's official documents, they're trying to break the Uyghur people's lineage, break their spirit, break their origin, and they break the bond, to break the soul of each mother. So as you can see, the Chinese government is being successful, because now the Uyghurs' babies are not being born. The Uyghur women are not being able to marry Uyghur men. So I feel for every single woman now detained or even just living in East Turkestan and facing such a tremendous crimes against humanity that the Chinese government is committing, and also the one of whom is my sister, the retired medical doctor Rushan Abbas.
Rushan, have you heard anything about your sister in these 3 years that there's been no communication or?
No, I don't even know where she's being held. How's her health? She was taken in September, which is late, summer, early fall, not too cold. So she was wearing pretty light clothes on her when she was taken away. I don't know where she's been wearing or what she's eating. How's her, situation? Absolutely no information of her.
I imagine it must be like incredibly difficult to continue this advocacy work and research work, not knowing where she's at and how the government may be reacting or retaliating towards your family even more. In this specific case of the cultural genocide and all these calls for the international community to pay attention to what's happening inside of East Turkestan, why specifically Islam?
Can I just correct you on one thing, because you kept mentioning cultural genocide. It's not cultural genocide anymore. It's the actual active physical genocide. When the Uyghur babies are unable to born, Uyghur young men are taken away and disappeared, when crematorias are being built next to the concentration camps for a culture that doesn't practice cremation. And the crematorias at the Uyghur neighborhoods, and the Uyghurs are just disappearing and not coming home. That is the genocide, everything we are describing. So to answer your question about why the Muslim majority countries or Islamic countries or the Islam, Muslim people are not really doing anything, or why Islam is being targeted like that. Actually, Chinese government is spreading massive disinformation in the Muslim majority countries, and also making the Muslim people fool by basically, when they are waging war on religion and the burning all the Quran and demolishing all the mosques and the making every aspect of Islam illegal and the putting millions of people in the concentration camps and calling them radicalized Islamic extremists and calling Islam or any religion for that matter mental disease and virus to be eradicated. While they are doing that within its borders, in China, in East Turkestan, they are building the largest mosque in Nigeria, and they are conducting webinars and the conferences entitled Islam in China, inviting the Muslim scholars to speak and telling them how Islam is flourishing in China. The people have a right to practice all religion. And basically, they are trying to contain the world, the Muslim people especially, and just keep them in the way that to gain their trust, I guess. So a lot of those Muslim people are also victims of China's disinformation and false narratives. But now more and more people are being educated, and this is information era. And if the media is being controlled by their government in Muslim majority countries, many Muslims in diaspora are being very vocal. For example, in UK, in November 13th, 8,000 Muslims in UK protested in front of the Chinese embassy. And the Chinese embassy brought down their flag. So the people in London will not know those Muslims are protesting in the front of the Chinese embassy. So literally, they hid their flag at the embassy. They brought down the Chinese flag. So what does that mean? That means they do care, they worry, they're scared from the Muslims. So please, I'm going to use your platform to speak here to the Muslims of the world, because there are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. The Chinese government is waging a war on faith itself. The Chinese government is calling Islam a disease to be eradicated for. The Chinese government is announcing publicly that they should, astaghfirullah, rewrite the Holy Quran and the Bible to make it compatible with Chinese atheist communist ideologies. How in the world, imagine how in the world Islam or Christianity or Catholic religion or Jewish religion or any religion for that matter, how can any religion be compatible with atheist communist ideology? But that's what the Chinese government is pushing forward. So if it's today, this is happening to the Uyghur Muslims, tomorrow it will be for everyone who believes any kind of religion, because any sort of original thought is a threat to the Chinese communist and racist and the nationalist government.
In that regard, it seems very contradictory in some terms how they are trying to, clean their image from what you're saying abroad with the Muslims around the world, but inside their borders, which they control, and China is a state of a very hermetic nature. We don't know what's actually happening inside unless, some reports get out. These horrible things and crimes against humanity and human rights violations are happening to Muslims. So Is China trying to save face towards the world to avoid any ongoing investigation? Why is this a strategy, the one that they're going for?
As I mentioned earlier, any kind of original thought is a threat to the Chinese government. And for the new China dream and what Xi Jinping wants for China and also for the entire world, the Chinese dream is for one China, one nation, speak one language. So anything that's different is a threat to them or make them uncomfortable. So what's happening to Uyghur people today, when you look at it, it is war on faith, war on humanity, war on freedom and democracy, war on women, and war on children. So we need to stand for humanity. And this is not China's internal affairs, as some of them claims. And this is not a political issue. And this is not some countries, using the Uyghurs as the case against somebody or China or something. This is a real China's war on Uyghurs. Myself, my husband, and the thousands of Uyghurs in diaspora, every one of them have personal experiences. When we say 3 million Uyghurs are detained, every one of them they have names, and their fathers, mothers, and their brothers and sisters, and their sons and the husbands. They're real human beings. They're well educated. They're university presidents, university professors, students, doctors, famous writers, successful business people, and they are philanthropists, and even pop stars, famous athletes. So whatever the Chinese government is telling the world is complete lie and disinformation. So the evildoers cannot silence the truth, and the more voices that proclaim it, the better. So we have to keep working towards the justice and be the voice for those voiceless, innocent people. And we need to do that not only for the sake of the Uyghur Muslims, the Uyghur people, but sake of the future of the world, sake of our children, which, the world that our children will inherit from us, and the freedom and the democracy that so many people worked so hard to establish.
Just to end this interview, I wanted to ask you what can be done? How can we support, how can we help the campaign for the Uyghurs?
Thank you so much. In China, it's a grave crime to say anything against the government. So it's extremely difficult to do anything for people there, but we can be their voice, as I mentioned, just, raise awareness, educate people. What you are doing here is excellent. Have more people speak, invite more people, even some of the victims of those concentration camps. Everything you do, amplifying the Uyghurs' voices will help. And as I always say, you don't need to be Uyghur, you don't need to be Muslim, you don't even need to be a human rights activist to do something. And they stand up for justice, because this is a war between good and evil. And it's time to take a stance, take a side. There's no neutrality. You either support the good or you support the evil. Doing anything with China, continue to do business with China is complicit with genocide. So just try to raise awareness and work with young people like yourself and ask them to write and call and communicate with their politicians and with their leaders to do something for Uyghur people and pass like legislatures to make sure that the Uyghur slaves are not being used for the products that your country is receiving, and the just the basic things like that. For what you can do for Campaign for Uyghurs is you can go to our website www.thecampaignforuyghurs.org and sign up for our like mailing list that we send out press releases, give updated information, and if you can, make small donations to support our work, so we can continue to amplify the voices of suppressed Uyghur people, and also follow us on social media and share the information that we are posting. For Twitter, Instagram, and the Facebook, it's Campaign for Uyghurs. And for myself is Rushan Abbas. So just try to help us spread the words, raise awareness, and educate yourself and educate people around you. Thank you so much.